room in New York. I'm coming to the end of my programme as you watch the jet take off. A pointer to viewers here in the UK. They will have the 6 o'clock news with Rita Chakrabarti in a moment or two, but we will also continue this coverage with Yalda Hakim taking us through those events both in Florida and as Donald Trump heads to New York. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Today at 6, a man who murdered a 9-year-old girl in her own home in Liverpool last year is sentenced to at least 42 years in prison. Olivia Pratt-Korbel was shot in the chest by gunman Thomas Cashman, who was chasing a fellow drug dealer. Cashman was taken to court but refused to appear in the dock. Olivia's mother later told reporters what his sentence meant for the family.
We welcome the sentence given, but what I can say is that my family and I have already started our life sentence, having to spend the rest of our lives without Olivia.
We'll be live with our correspondent who was in court in Manchester. Also on the programme, classrooms in England will be empty again on 2 dates within the next month as teachers vote overwhelmingly for more strike action. In Russia, the pro-war blogger killed by a bomb concealed in a statuette handed to him during a meeting in a St. Petersburg cafe.
Ladies and gentlemen, your Artemis II crew.
And the 4 astronauts taking humankind on a mission around the moon after a gap of 50 years.
Coming up on the BBC News Channel, what next for Chelsea and their hunt for a new boss as Graham Potter becomes the 13th Premier League manager sacked this season.
Good evening. The murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in her own home in Liverpool last year by a gunman who was chasing a fellow drug dealer shocked the entire country. Today, her killer, Thomas Cashman, was sentenced to a minimum of 42 years in prison, meaning that he'll be in his mid-70s before he can be considered for early release. Cashman refused to appear in the dock for the sentencing, but the judge told the court in Manchester that Olivia's future had been cruelly snatched away and that Cashman's actions were chilling. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz reports.
The teddy bear that Cheryl Corbell has been clasping at court is made from her daughter's pyjamas. Some small comfort as she arrived to see Olivia's murderer sentenced. But in a cruel insult, she was denied the opportunity to look into the eyes of Thomas Cashman. He had been brought to court amidst high security this morning, having last week been convicted of the little girl's murder. I was in court as Olivia's family waited for Cashman to be brought up from the cells. We waited and then waited some more. The police waited, the prosecution waited, the jurors waited. And then Cashman's barrister came in and said he wouldn't be coming. The glass dock stayed empty and the hearing happened without him. It meant he wasn't there to hear Cheryl Corbell as she went into the witness box to speak about her daughter's murder. She cried and she said the thing she misses most is hearing Olivia say mum. Everything's just so quiet now, she said. I can't cope with the silence. Cheryl Corbell was supported in court by her family as sentence was passed.
We can now draw a line under 7 months of agonising torment that we have had to endure at the hands of Cashman. My thanks go to the witnesses who bravely assisted the prosecution case and defied the usual stance of people do not grass.
Olivia was shot last August. Terrified, she'd got out of bed to find her mum after hearing gunfire in the street. Cashman was chasing another drugs dealer, Joseph Nee. He fired at him, but his gun jammed and Nee ran towards an open doorway. It was Olivia's house. Cashman shot as Nee barged in. The bullet went through the door.
The real gravity of this case is that a young child was shot and killed in her own home. As children do, Olivia was coming downstairs to seek reassurance. Cheryl Corbell should have been able to give that reassurance and to tuck Olivia back into bed. What's happened instead was chilling and strikes fear not only into the immediate community, but also into the minds of other children and their parents.
All I want to know is what I'm arrested for.
Cashman was caught after a large-scale manhunt.
You're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
The 2 guns he used haven't been found. Tonight he's beginning a 42-year stretch behind bars. A father of 2 himself, he's shown no remorse and taken no responsibility for murdering another parent's child. It's the dreadful human cost you can't get away from here, the senseless waste of a young life which had barely begun. Olivia's auntie summed it up outside court here when she said that her niece had died a scared 9-year-old, and she hopes that that fact alone will haunt Cashman for the rest of his days. And she added that she hopes that his conviction will lead to more guns being handed in, so that no other family has to go through the same tragedy as Olivia's.
Judith, thank you. And there is a special panorama tonight called The Drugs War That Killed Olivia, and that's on BBC One at 8 o'clock and also on the iPlayer. Now, members of England's largest teaching union are to strike for another 2 days after voting by an overwhelming majority to reject the latest pay offer from the government. The Education Secretary called it extremely disappointing and said it'll result in more disruption for children. Teachers were offered an additional £1,000 one-off payment this year, in addition to the 5% pay award. For next year, from September, the offer is 4.3% for most teachers, along with the introduction of a £30,000 starting salary. But that was turned down by the National Education Union as insulting, and walkouts are now planned on the 27th of April and also on the 2nd of May. Our education editor Branwyn Jeffries reports now from Harrogate, where the NEU's annual conference is taking place.
Teachers arrived at conference today. After 4 days of strikes, 6 days of pay talks, they waited to hear the latest on their dispute.
The number of our members that rejected the government's pay offer is 191,319.
The union leaders called for more negotiations.
We want to say to parents that we don't want to take strike action and we don't want to cause disruption to exam preparation.
The strength of feeling here is clear. The vote to reject was overwhelming.
The profession itself is furious. We're very, very angry at the offer. It's an insult to us.
We really struggle to get science teachers because people don't want to do the job anymore, because unfortunately the amount of stress and workload for the level of pay that they're getting, we struggle to recruit in education.
There is a promise to protect pupils facing exams. The unions say the offer is too far below the cost of living and not backed by enough funding for schools.
If you talk to head teachers, they will look at their budget with you and they'll say, we can't afford to do this. We will have to make cuts in order to make those pay rises. That's not good enough for the children of this country.
This word is incredibly important.
England's schools will get more than £2 billion extra in cash and £500 million more next year to help with pay. But each school is also grappling with many rising bills.
Energy bills, inflation on food. Just the general cost, the increase, just as for everybody else, the prices have gone up incredibly high for schools.
In Harrogate's Valley Gardens, parents absorbed the news of more strikes.
It could mean that I might lose out on money, I might lose out on just certain things of everyday essentials that you need that money for, especially with the cost of living crisis.
It's unfair for the students that have got exams and study coming up. Is disruptive for them, and after all the pandemic and that.
I get it, there's been years of frozen pay and all that kind of stuff, but they can't just expect in the current climate, inflation-linked pay. It's just not going to happen.
And with spring local elections soon, party leaders also responded.
Their education has already suffered as a result of COVID, and in the run-up to exams, to hear about new strike dates in the face of what is a very reasonable pay offer, I think is extremely disappointing news.
I'm disappointed that it's come to this, and I know many parents will be really worried about upcoming strikes. What I want to see is everybody getting around the table and resolving these issues. They can be resolved, and the sooner they're resolved, the better.
The government have not engaged, and that means they're failing our children, they're failing our families, they're failing our schools.
With no immediate prospect of talks, more strike dates could also be called for just before the summer holidays. Well, today the government repeated that it believed its offer was fair and reasonable, and now that it's been rejected, the matter will go to the independent pay review body to consider teachers' pay for next year. The union says its campaign will continue. Tomorrow morning, delegates here will be debating a motion calling for a further 3 days of strikes just before the summer holiday, and union leaders told me that they would also consider reballoting, which raises the prospect of more disruption for parents and pupils stretching into the autumn term.
OK, thank you, Branman. An estimated 1,800 workers at the Passport Office have begun a 5-week strike, also in a dispute about pay. The government insists the action won't affect the amount of time it takes to process a passport application. But the PCS union, which represents civil servants, is predicting huge delays. The Prime Minister has set out plans for a new police task force to tackle grooming gangs, saying that victims have often been ignored because of what he claimed was cultural sensitivity and political correctness in dealing with perpetrators. Under the plans, specialist officers would be sent to help local police forces with their investigations as part of a drive to crack down on child sexual exploitation. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons is here with me. Tom, just explain the context behind today's announcement.
Well, there's a local election coming, and politicians are often asked what they're going to do about grooming gangs. It's one of those things you often hear asked online. This National Crime Agency task force is going to step in and help. It's not clear yet whether there's going to be any new money, any new resources behind that. But I think the reason the government's been accused of jumping into the culture wars today is that it has focused on this type of sexual abuse and on race and on whether political correctness is making it worse.
So what is the evidence that ethnicity is a factor here?
Well, the Home Secretary said that almost all British Pakistani men, overwhelmingly British Pakistani men, were involved in this sort of abuse. And the Home Office said to me that she was referring to 3 cases, Rotherham, Rochdale and Telford. But the truth is that a couple of years ago, a Home Office study said that white men were more likely to be involved in abuse in groups. And the Child Abuse Inquiry said that we really didn't have good enough data to be able to reach conclusions.
And what is it that victims and campaigners are calling for?
Well, they're worried about racial stereotyping, this form of abuse. They're worried about online abuse not getting enough attention. But they're also worried about something else, and that is the focus on the perpetrator and not the victim. In many of these cases, if you read the reports, the concern was that young girls in particular were seen as having risky lifestyles, drinking drugs, hanging out with older men, and that their concerns were not taken seriously, they weren't believed, and that is really the cause of a lot of these issues.
OK, thank you very much. Tom Simons reporting there. In Russia, an anti-war campaigner has been detained by officials over the killing of a well-known pro-military blogger in St. Petersburg. It's been reported that Vladlen Tatarsky died in an explosion shortly after being presented with a statuette yesterday evening. The woman being held, Daria Trepova, was previously arrested for taking part in protests against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This report from our security correspondent Frank Gardner contains some distressing images.
An ordinary scene on an ordinary street in St. Petersburg. A woman enters a cafe carrying a box containing a statuette. It's hard to verify this, but Russia says she was delivering a bomb. Inside the cafe, there's a meeting of Russian pro-war activists. The invited speaker is this man, Vladlen Tatarsky, a prolific blogger with over 500,000 followers. And then this. The explosion killed him outright and injured over 30 others. Russian officials were quick to blame Ukraine, which denied it. But the suspect now detained is not Ukrainian, she's Russian. Police are naming her as Daria Trepova, an anti-war activist. They've released this footage of her being arrested at home. She's then seen being questioned, apparently under duress. Russia says she's confessed to carrying the statuette that killed Tatarsky in the cafe. He was a big figure amongst Russian military bloggers. A former convict, he fought against Ukraine in the Donbass. He was highly critical of Russian failures on the battlefield, leading some to suspect inter-Russian rivalry. Well, this is a really murky incident. Despite all the claims and counterclaims, it's not immediately clear exactly who was behind this explosion. But to help guide us through it is Olga Ivshina from the BBC Russian service. Olga, what is your take on this explosion?
Russian war supporters and many other experts believe it must be Ukrainian intelligence behind this attack. Russian investigative committee thinks that Russian opposition was also involved. We need to remember that in last year, another prominent vocal supporter of war was targeted in Moscow. On the other hand, many Russian war commanders were killed in strange circumstances since 2014.
As Russian investigators pieced together what happened yesterday in St. Petersburg, the propaganda war continues. Russia says this was Ukraine-linked terrorism. Ukraine's presidential advisor says it was Russian on Russian. Spiders, he tweeted, are eating each other in a jar. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
The time is 6:15. Our top story this evening. A man has been sentenced to a minimum of 42 years in prison for murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool last summer. And residents in a block of London flats ask why it took authorities 2 years to discover their dead neighbour's body, despite several attempts to raise the alarm.
Coming up on the BBC News channel, we'll be at Goodison Park on a big night at both ends of the Premier League table as Everton, fighting survival, take on Champions League chasing Tottenham.
Survivors of the Manchester Arena attack are taking legal action thought to be the first of its kind against a conspiracy theorist who claims the attack was faked. Martin and Eve Hibbert, who were left with severe disabilities after the 2017 blast, are suing Richard D. Hall for defamation and harassment. Let's hear more on this from our correspondent Mariana Spring, who's in a new hub above the newsroom, bringing together our experts on disinformation and fact-checking.
This is Martin Hibbert. He survived the bombing at the Manchester Arena that happened back in 2017 and killed 22 people. Martin and his daughter Eve were left severely disabled after the attack. And since then, they've been targeted with conspiracy theories and hate that have denied what happened, suggesting the attack was staged and that they were somehow lying about their injuries. Now Martin has launched legal action against this man, Richard D. Hall. Last year, I revealed how this conspiracy theorist targeted Martin, Eve and other Manchester Arena survivors. He even posted online about how he tracked them down to their homes and workplaces to see if they were lying about their injuries. That case is not dissimilar to this one that played out over in the US. Alex Jones, a talk show host who's promoted conspiracy theories suggesting that the Sandy Hook school shooting was a hoax, was taken to court by families affected by that shooting because of the hate and harassment they experienced after those conspiracies. He was ordered by a US court to pay almost $1.5 billion in damages. There's not as much money involved here, but let me tell you a bit more about the tactics that Hall was using to target Manchester Arena survivors. He had a stall based in Merthyr Tydfil where he sold a book and DVDs promoting conspiracy theories, including about the attack on Manchester Arena. He then tracked down Manchester Arena survivors to near here in Wales, near Portmeirion, and also to the areas around Manchester. They told me how they were left feeling unsafe and frightened by his tactics. Since the investigation, Hall has continued to post online about the Manchester Arena attack. At the time, I confronted him at the stall he ran, and he told me I was wrong about how he operated. He seems, though, to have held firm to his position, suggesting again that the Manchester Arena attack was staged or fabricated in some way. I've since been in touch with him about the legal action that's been filed, and he didn't respond. Since the original investigation, Hall's reach has significantly reduced. His YouTube channel, which had over 80,000 subscribers, was taken down and his stall was closed. And Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham also said he wants to campaign for new laws that could better protect people like Martin and Eve. But that wouldn't be very easy. We know that there are lots of questions about how to balance protecting users from harmful content online with also protecting their right to freedom of expression. It's an issue that policymakers, social media sites and others have been grappling with for some time. For Martin, he thinks that the solution for him is to go through the courts and see whether the legal system can afford him some justice. If you want to hear more about Martin's story and the legal case, you can listen to Disaster Trolls podcast, the bonus episode available on BBC Sounds and Radio 4.
The BBC's Mariana Spring reporting there. Now, in the last few minutes, Donald Trump has left for New York to face arrest in a case involving the payment of $130,000 to an adult film star. It's the first time ever that a former president has faced criminal prosecution. The charges are due to be made public tomorrow when Mr. Trump appears before a judge. His legal team say he will plead innocent and vigorously contest the case. Well, our North America editor, Sarah Smith, is in New York for us now. What can we expect in the coming days, Sarah?
Well, as you say, Donald Trump's currently making his way from Florida here to New York, and when he gets here, he will spend the night in his penthouse at Trump Tower before tomorrow making his way to the Manhattan Criminal Court to surrender himself. Now, that means we're not going to see pictures of him being led into the courthouse in handcuffs, but once he is inside, he will be fingerprinted and have a DNA sample taken like any other defendant. Don't expect, though, to see him looking embarrassed or shamefaced in any way. He has obviously decided to embrace the worldwide attention that is going with his imminent arrest, to relish being back in the spotlight once again, because he seems absolutely convinced that what he claims is a politically motivated case against him is just going to galvanize his supporters and actually boost his campaign to get back into the White House. So he thinks he can spin this as good news for the Trump campaign.
OK, Sarah, thank you. The brother of the TV presenter Philip Schofield has been found guilty of sexually abusing a teenage boy over a period of 3 years. Timothy Schofield was convicted of 11 sexual offences following a trial at Exeter Crown Court. Our South West England correspondent Jenny Kumar is there for us now. Jenny.
Well, Timothy Schofield worked in IT for Avon and Somerset Police during the time the abuse happened. He denied 11 sexual offences, including 2 of sexual activity with a child. Now, he told the jury, though, that he watched pornography with a 16-year-old. He said the teenager had consented and that there was no physical contact between them. And he also told the jury about his mental health struggles, saying that he'd been gay all his life, that this had been incredibly difficult because he had told nobody. But the prosecution argued that the child had been under 16 and there was sexual activity. And after 5 hours, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty of all sexual offences. And today, his brother, the TV presenter Philip Schofield, gave a statement. He said that he welcomed the guilty verdicts, and he said that as far as he was concerned, he no longer had a brother.
Thank you. Jenny Kumar reporting there. Residents in a block of flats in South London are considering legal action against the housing association Peabody after their neighbour lay dead for 2.5 years before her body was found. Sheila Celioni's neighbours say it had been obvious for a long time that something was wrong, but their concerns were ignored. Harry Farley reports.
Sheila Celioni died in this flat alone in August 2019. She was deeply isolated. She had no family she was in touch with, no friends turned up to her funeral. When police broke down her door 2.5 years after she died, they found a tidy, clean apartment and a body that could only be identified by dental records. Neighbours like Audrey Parole say that for months they had been trying to raise the alarm with their housing association, Peabody.
For the first, I'd say, 1.5 years, you couldn't stand in this hallway, because just the smell was just like nauseous, it just made you sick.
14 months after Sheila died, police did come and do a welfare check here. On that first visit, they didn't enter the flat, and a mistake by a police operator meant Peabody was told that Sheila had been seen alive and well. The Metropolitan Police apologised. It would be more than a year later that Sheila's body was eventually found. But her neighbours blame Peabody, who they say failed to listen when they raised concerns and missed multiple opportunities to find Sheila in the first year after she died.
There was always this gut feeling that something had happened to her. So it was just devastating to know that she was there all along. I do want to get it out because I don't think Peabody actually realised how much it's affected us. And we're still living in that sort of devastation and trauma. I literally face Sheila's flat every day I leave my house. I'm reminded of what's happened, and it could have been avoided.
Peabody said they are trying to move Sheila's neighbours, but there is a desperate shortage of social housing in London. In a statement, the organisation said they were devastated by what happened. They accepted that in the first year after Sheila died, they didn't do enough, and said they had put in new ways of working since Sheila was found. They added the case raises important questions for wider society. Audrey and her neighbours say it's deeply impacted their lives.
It's degrading what happened to Sheila, and it's inhumane. It should have never happened and never got to the point where it did. It's made me look at my neighbours and my community differently, that we should really look out for other people.
Harry Farley, BBC News.
Now, an amazing discovery in the waters south of Japan. Scientists have caught and filmed fish at the greatest ever depth on record. This is a snailfish, and it was found over 8 kilometres below the sea. At that depth, it would experience 800 times the pressure at the ocean surface. But scientists say the gelatinous makeup of their bodies helped them to survive. Now, from the deepest sea to deep space, the US space agency NASA has revealed the 4 astronauts who will orbit the moon aboard its Orion spacecraft next year. The Artemis 2 mission is the first crewed flight aimed at eventually returning astronauts to the moon's surface. Our science editor Rebecca Morrell has this report.
It's a new era of pioneers and adventurers,
vying for seats on the most sought-after mission in 50 years. On a spacecraft that's heading back to the moon. 4 astronauts ready to make history. And now they've been revealed. NASA's Christina Koch, who holds the record for the longest continuous stay in space by a woman. Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency, a fighter pilot and a physicist. And NASA's former chief astronaut, Reid Wiseman, the Artemis 2 commander. And making up the 4, piloting the spacecraft will be Victor Glover.
Artemis 2 is more than a mission to the moon and back. It's more than a mission that has to happen before we send people to the surface of the moon. It is the next step on the journey that gets humanity to Mars.
The one thing I'm most excited about is that we are going to carry your excitement, your aspirations, your dreams with us on this mission. Artemis 2, your mission.
3, 2, 1. And this is the rocket they'll be riding on. It made a test flight to the moon last year with no crew on board, passing with flying colours. Now it's ready for the next step. The Artemis 2 mission will lift off from Cape Canaveral in Florida. The spacecraft will spend the first 42 hours orbiting the Earth, testing the life support systems. It's the first time they'll be used. The astronauts will then spend 4 days travelling to the moon, flying far beyond it, before heading back for a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. The whole trip will take about 10 days.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, a Merry Christmas. And God bless all of you on the good Earth.
The Apollo 8 crew were the first people to see an Earthrise as it appeared above the barren lunar surface. Now this next generation will get to take in these views again. Their mission is scheduled to take off at the end of next year. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Sarah Keith-Lucas with blue skies at last, Sarah.
Yes, Rita, blue skies and some strength to the sunshine as well out there. It's been a largely dry day across many parts of the UK today, and we've been waiting patiently for it, haven't we? And it's arrived, the blue sky and the sunshine. This was the picture in East Lothian a little bit earlier on. And there's more of the same to come tomorrow for many of us, not everywhere, but much of the UK stays dry through the day tomorrow, again with some long spells of spring sunshine. But there will be some more cloud and rain moving in towards the northwest. And that's down to the fact that we've got a weather front which is pushing its way in from the Atlantic. So that's going to bring increasing cloud and some outbreaks of rain through tonight into tomorrow across the far northwest. But high pressure sits to the east, and that is going to be the dominant feature of our weather, at least for the next 24 hours or so. So the rest of this evening and tonight, then once the sun sets, those temperatures are going to drop quite quickly, particularly for southern and eastern parts of the UK. So we're likely to see temperatures across parts of England and Wales, perhaps as low as about -4 or -5 degrees. Across the northwest, though, things do stay a little bit milder, where you've got more cloud and some patchy outbreaks of rain. So through the morning, then, we'll continue to see that cloud filtering into parts of Northern Ireland, the Western Isles as well. A little bit of light patchy rain through the morning. Eastern Scotland and much of England and Wales staying dry and sunny, though, and temperatures a little bit warmer than recent days, perhaps, particularly close to the east coast, where it's been quite breezy. Lighter winds, highs up to around 14 or 15 degrees. But that weather front in the northwest continues its progress towards the south and east as we look through the middle part of the week. So that's going to bring a bit of rain, I think, through the day on Wednesday, initially across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, pushing eastwards for England and Wales. But I think the far southeast of England towards East Anglia could well stay dry and clear for much of the day, and temperatures up to around about 13 or 14 degrees, something a little clearer moving in to the northwest later on. But it does look like we will have that unsettled spell of weather, so a bit more rain lasting through Wednesday into Thursday. But at the moment, it looks fairly optimistic for Good Friday and into the Easter weekend. It is looking largely dry and settled, and temperatures not doing too badly for the time of year. Rita.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And that is all from us. You can, of course, keep up with all the latest developments on the BBC website. From the 6 o'clock team, it's goodbye. But the news does, of course, continue here on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Bye-bye.
Hi there, good evening. Welcome to Sports Day this Monday night with me, Chetan Pathak. Coming up on tonight's programme, the Premier League sackings continue. Potter and Rodgers are out. What next for Chelsea and Leicester? Tottenham need a new boss too. Life after Conte begins at Everton this evening on a big night at both ends of the table. And could wearing body cams be the answer, as hundreds of amateur referees tell us they fear for their safety on the pitch? Also coming up on the programme before 7 o'clock, why England netball wants to get more girls and women talking about female health in sport.
There was a range of research that said to us we really do need to support women and girls with their bodies at every life stage.
Welcome along. Thank you for joining us. So with 2 months of the Premier League season to go, over half the clubs no longer have the manager they started the season with. A record 13 have now lost their jobs. Graham Potter, the latest, with Chelsea 11th in the table. This was supposed to be a new era at Stamford Bridge after the departure of Roman Abramovich, but chaotic and brutal is how the current owners are being described after months of telling us they'd be standing by their man. Patrick Geary reports.
The American owners say that they won't be chopping and changing managers in the same way as Potter retains the support of
Graham Potter apparently still has the support of Chairman Todd Bowley and the club's board, despite their poor run.
Whacked, backed, but then sacked. Graham Potter came to Chelsea to begin what they call in football a project, a long-term vision, a 5-year contract. It lasted not 7 months. He leaves with the team mid-table and his assistant in charge.
It's been really difficult at every single level, and especially emotional. Obviously, you have to deal with the press conference. You have to deal with the players. But what's hard, the relationship with Graham and Billy. It's difficult to deal with that. How it affects to the families.
That personal impact is something Potter himself had mentioned.
Here goes Mahrez!
As results fell away after the World Cup, he spoke of the abuse his family had suffered. This was a level of pressure he'd not experienced at any previous job. The defeat to Aston Villa at the weekend was his 11th in 31 games. Patience had run out.
The club where he came from at Brighton, certain things were accepted. Then when you come to Chelsea, it's just a big shift. People have to understand that. And that's why I feel like that was kind of biting at him in the sense of like results have no time of delivering. They have to deliver it straight away. There's no time to wait.
The owner's will to win had been backed by cash, lots of it. Chelsea had spent more than £300 million in January on 8 new players. Potter, who'd always worked with tight-knit groups in his career, had to manage, motivate and train a squad of more than 30 senior professionals. Extracting quality from quantity quickly has proven too tricky.
Impossible job to make it work incredibly well in the short term. I'd say that's pretty close to an impossible job because you've got so many young players that are just learning the game.